Hey everybody, it's Lewis here, and in this video we're going to be going over the JavaScript file that we use to generate the formatted text from our assets page on Lobstr. So the purpose of this video is to hopefully showcase for anyone who is curious, interested, regardless of their knowledge or experience, how the code does its work and why it is secure. So I'm going to explain the code as best as I can in a way that is suitable for people on both sides of the spectrum regarding knowledge level. I will be doing my best to parse everything into understandable terms, and conversely, if you're watching this and you do feel as though I'm over-explaining, please feel free to increase the video playback speed, as I will also try my best to explain it with a little more breadth. So the code that we use for the CSV generation lives inside this file called lobstr.js, and that's right what we got right here. So lobstr.js is what we are going to use here. So the .js at the end of the file name denotes that this file is in fact a JavaScript file, and it contains, you guessed it, JavaScript code. So if you're unfamiliar with JavaScript and what it is and what it does, there's a couple links that I put in the description that link you to some material that you can take a look at and learn more. But in a nutshell, basically, JavaScript is the language that allows web pages to be interactive. Every modern-day website uses JavaScript in some fashion to employ a pleasant experience for the end user, i.e. you and me. One more important thing to understand up front is what .csv files are. And this is probably a topic for a separate video, but the basics are as follows. CSV stands for comma separated values. And these are files that are structured in such a way so that they are readable by spreadsheet software. So if you want to learn more about that, I put a link in the description talking about a little more details on what CSV files are. So if you're new to coding, this material might be quite dense, and some parts may need their own video for better explanation. But like I said before, I will do my best to give you a crash course so it's understandable, at least at a high level. Okay, let's get into the code and I will show you how it generates our asset list. So the first things we want to look at is these variables defined here in the first 12 lines of the code. So these are all created using the let keyword, which is one way to create a custom variable in JavaScript. So if you want to learn more about variables, I left a link in the description that you can check out entitled Variables. So if you look at these first 12 lines, you might start to see what is happening by noticing some of the clues, such as the names that I gave these variables. So the very first line in this file is simply targeting a particular element on the assets page of Lobstr. So I'm going to show you how this process works. So I'm going to click over here to Lobstr and I'm going to right click and inspect. So if I want to target these assets, I'm going to try to pick an element that all of these elements are housed in, and you can click this this toggle button right here in order to hover over the page, and you can see all the breakdowns of different elements that are happening here. So if I hover right over here, we can see my assets section, and we'll click onto that, and I'm going to drag over so we can see the elements here, and you can see it says my assets section. But even if we go a little bit deeper down into the file structure, we can see my asset table, and then deeper down, nested even more, is trusted asset list. And you can see on the page there that we've got this nice container that contains all of our assets. So that is the way that I found this class name. You can see that it says div class equals trusted asset list. So I took that, I went ahead and copied that right there, and I pasted it so that we use this query selector function to grab that element. Okay, so from there we're just actually so what this actually does is it creates a collection of each element within this container. So what the next line does is that it creates an array from this trusted assets list. So it's taking the trusted assets list and taking all the children that are nested in this element which is basically every one of our elements. You can see this is one of our assets, that's another one, and you can see very clearly kind of what it's doing here. So that's what I did to grab each one of these asset elements. So from there you can see kind of by the names of our variables what is doing what. So it's basically creating a list of all the names, a list of all the codes, tokens, domains, and so on, the issuer, address, and that's these first 12 lines. It's basically a bunch of arrays. Now if you're not sure what an array is, just think of an array as a list. In some programming languages, an array is actually called a list. So just think of it that way. It's in layman's terms, very simple to imagine there. So as I said, you could probably see by now that these first variables in the first 12 lines of code are all arrays or lists of the different bits of data that we want to read and extract from the web page so that they can be formatted by our program. Real quick on a semantic note, for the more advanced watchers here, you can see a little bit of what I did with these map functions here, and this might look like interesting syntax for you. It's just some fun syntactic sugar here that's called, I think it's semantic notation. And what it's doing is we can remove the curly braces as well as the return statement, and it will still run the code just fine. Just a little bit of extra sugariness there. As well as on line 10, it's just got a normal ternary statement. Again, just a sugary syntax there. So let's move on here. So you can see after line 12, we've got a bunch of things that are called using the keyword function. So all the rest of our code is basically these function definitions. So you might be able to guess this, but a function, what basically a function is a mini program that does a thing. It takes an input, it does some work, and then it returns an output based on the work that was done inside the function. So what we have here from line 14 to line 82 are what's known as function definitions, and they do exactly what the name implies. Nothing except for to define what the said function is to do. So a function doesn't actually do anything until it is called. And that's actually what's happening here at these bottom lines. So we've got here display totals, and the next one here is merge all assets info into CSV string. So we've got the names of the functions here, and you also notice these parentheses at the end of each one. And this is how you call a function in JavaScript. This is how you make the function run. So even though display totals is right here starting on line 56, it does nothing until it is called here on line 84. Same thing with merge all assets. It is defined up here on line 14, but it doesn't do anything in our program until it reaches this line. Okay. So let's get into our main function. This is our main function. As you can see, it's getting called, and that's what is doing all of our work to get our string. So right up at the top here, we start here with an array that we declare within our function that we're going to put all of our merged strings into. And line 17 actually assigns the first position of the array to be the value of basically how we're going to format our CSV string. Okay, so first we start with the name, and then the code, asset amount, the currency amount, domain, and then last the asset issuer. And what this does from here is it goes into a for loop. Now, if you're not aware of what a for loop does, I'd left a link in the description to learn a little bit more about that. But basically, it goes and iterates however many times, and it happens to be the length of our assets array. So however many assets we have, it's going to do this work that many times. And the work that it's doing is right here in this line. And all it's doing is taking this array, and it's going to push or put a new merged string onto this array. Okay, and then at the end, it's just going to join it, and it's going to log it into the console here. So what does this one do? So basically, on line 23, we've got our next biggest function here, next most important function, which is called merge info into CSV format. and it takes one parameter called index. And what this is doing is basically using all these arrays and grabbing their data based on the position in the array. So if you can imagine, the first position in the array is going to have all this data. So in names array, the first position is going to be called lumens. So as you can imagine, it's taking the name, it's setting a name variable to the certain position within the names array that we have. So it takes the index, and you can see that it just basically passes that same index through each one, because as you can see, or as you can imagine, inside our names array, our first value is going to be this first asset, so it's going to be lumens. Codes array, the first value is going to be xlm. Let's move this over. Same thing with tokens. Tokens is going to be this one right here. Domain, there isn't one, it won't be there. Issuer address, it'll be next. So that's the way that it's grabbing every single one of these values, is that it's looking into the array at the certain position or index, and it's going to set that value equal to our declared variable inside our function. So each time it runs into this for loop, it starts as our I variable at 0. So that I gets passed into our function there, and that's how it's able to grab each one of our things. So after it's grabbed all of those, it formats it on line 30 and returns the string based on name, code, token, just as it shows in this first one. So I just lined it up to make it be the same. So this is the main work that it is doing here. So you can see that that's the main chunk of our program, right in these two functions. So these next two functions here are helper functions, you could say. This one actually just takes our data, it targets a certain child within the data structure of the page, and it grabs this text content and just, it basically removes any extra spaces and any extra characters that we don't need and returns it cleaned up, basically. And format arrays does exactly what it sounds like it's doing, and that is that it takes an array and it runs a map function on it. Now this you don't have to worry about, but basically it's going to go over each position, each value in the array, and do something to it. So basically what this function is doing is handling for certain cases. So line 46 is actually here to check to see if there is a domain name or not. So in the case, for instance, of lumens, there is not one. So what it's going to do is actually push an empty space onto the array. And that handles in case there is not a domain. And the way we check it to see if there's a domain or not, to see if there's a dot or a period within the string that we get when we look at it. Okay, so the next three lines are going to handle for cases when the name of the asset is more than one word. So you can imagine if we've got, for instance, NLSPA, there's going to be a space right there. So this is actually going to come out as at least two elements. And what this line, these three lines of code does is that it just makes sure to cram those together into one element before we move on. And then these two lines, all it does is it takes our code in parentheses, and it just removes the parentheses on this line, and then it just reassigns that position, that element, I should say, in the array as what we just changed that into. I hope that makes sense. And at the end, we're going to return what all the changed things we did into this array. Okay, so that's basically that for our string. Now, one other thing that it does do, if you look over here under My Assets and List of Your Assets, this is how it generally looks. But what I can do is show you when we display totals, we're going to call that function, and we're also going to define that function inside our console here. So I'll copy and paste right in here, and then when I paste it right there, assets array is not defined, so we don't have our assets array. So you know what I'm going to do is go ahead and just take our whole program and paste it in there, and it's going to do all the stuff. It's going to have our string, but as you can see, I'm trying to show you, is on the page we now have new elements that give us new data, including our total assets, our uncharted assets, and the ones that have been filled. So that is what display totals does. Now, I've already explained the high level of what this function does. Is it creates elements and puts them onto the page. So I'm not going to explain this one line by line, but if you want an educational moment and to challenge yourself just a little, go ahead and take a look at it and describe each line as best you can and see if you can tell me what is happening in this function. You can put your answer into the comments or send it to me on Telegram. The link to that is in the description, and I definitely would love to see what you come up with. So as you can hopefully now see, all the code in this file utilizes JavaScript on the front end to extract the info that is already served to you on your browser window. And by front end, what I mean is that it uses absolutely no HTTP requests, which is where a computer sends and receives data to and from a server that's located anywhere in the world, aka the back end. So there's the front end and the back end, but this all works on the front end, meaning it's all happening on your local device. So your asset data is safe and secure and now in spreadsheet form. Awesome. Well, okay, that is the video. I hope it was educational and understandable, as I hope that this video was able to show you, no matter your skill level, what the code does and how it does it. If it was difficult to follow or if I glossed over some things too quickly, please let me know in the comments. And if you liked the video and you like this type of content, smash the like button and let me know what you think in the comments too. Thanks for watching, everyone. Until next time, see ya.